Welcome to TV Free Baltimore's Books and Authors.
Hello, this is Paul Stefan, and this is another edition of Books and Authors. And today, our guest has written, you could say, a lot of weird books, but also a lot of other things too, which we'll find out about him and about his works as an author. So today we have with us the British man of letters, and I think numbers, mostly zeros and ones. It's Matt Lake. And welcome, Matt.
Hello, Paul. Thank you.
Now, because our show is featured for Maryland people, mostly in the Maryland audiences, I hate to start there, but we're going to start with you working on Weird Maryland.
Don't hate to start there. It was one of the best, most fun projects I had a chance to work on.
Oh, it was?
I got sucked into the whole weird phenomenon through New Jersey,
Yes.
where I wasn't living either. So I got sucked into that by editing this collection of 10 years worth of articles for the magazine Weird New Jersey. They wanted to make a book out of it. It was 3 times too long, so they said, Matt, we want you to take one word out of every 3 and make a book out of it. And here's the thing, we want you to keep all the stories and maintain the voice. And so I started plowing through these words and throwing away the excess verbiage. And it was one of those things where it was a chore doing that much work on any body of writing, because it was well written and interesting anyway, but there was too much of it.
Yeah.
And because it was a chore, I was thinking, it's a paycheck, I was thinking. And then when I was editing one of the ghost stories, the phone rang, and I must have leapt out of my clothes and skin 4 foot in the air. And then I thought, this material's really strong. It's getting under my skin. And I'm looking, it was a job, but it was really getting under my skin. So when that book became successful and they said, we're thinking of doing all the states, tell me the states you've lived in. I was going, well, Pennsylvania, Maryland, California. And said, well, California's too far away, but Pennsylvania and Maryland, get on them. So I did. And in the process, I met a whole bunch of people who were steeped in bizarre Maryland law. And so where I was lacking, clearly I was wandering in there sounding like a slightly refined Ozzy Osbourne. And they were going, you're not from around these parts. And I was going, well, no, I'm from Dundalk, obviously. And that broke the ice, But I wound up working with a number of people who were, magazine people, newspaper people, folklorists, and just, people who drive cars with hands sticking out of them. The good people in Maryland. So I wound up talking to a lot of people, seeing a lot of stuff, picking up some really good stories.
I would imagine, because I didn't know you did the Jersey one. But
I edited the Jersey one.
You edited that.
Yeah,
and
that's
you
absolutely.
did Pennsylvania and then Maryland.
That's right, and then England, and then Weird US Volume 2.
So many books that you did in that series.
They all in all, the Weird New Jersey company that put them all out did, I think, 28, and I was involved one way or another with about 20 of them. So I was, I contributed stories, edited stories, wrote or edited, quite a number of those books.
Now, were you comfortable with it? Because I think something like that might fall into, they present to you, this is a format. These are the things that you have to write about. Or were you able to pick the weird things that you wrote about or not?
I was.
Okay.
I had a fairly free rein. There were people who had written in to Weird New Jersey about stuff in different states, because they would run this thing called The Fringe in their magazine for years. So a lot of people had written stuff in. There were originally chapter headings of, you have to have, they called it Cemetery Safari, and I wound up calling it Tombstone Tourism instead, because I like that a little better. But there's got to be some graveyard stories. Well, that's great, because I love graveyards. I mean, they are really, really fascinating to me. And there's always bizarre things by the side of the road, and then there's cryptids. There's the state monster. So we had plenty in Maryland, of course. I mean, there's Chessie the sea creature, and the snallygaster, who's one of my, which is halfway a gag and halfway not. And there was a lot in the 70s in particular. There was a lot of there's a lot of Bigfoot interest out there in some of the more remote parts of the state. So there had to be monsters.
Of course.
Abandoned stuff by the side, abandoned asylums and abandoned buildings. Of course, there are plenty of them. There's some wonderful stories there.
Ghosts.
Oh yeah, I forgot about ghosts. Yeah, ghosts as well, and all the above. So there was no shortage.
Now tell us, if you could, like, what do you think were some of the weirdest things in weird Maryland?
Well, I was hugely fond of the Black Aggie legend because it had gone on so long, and there was a piece of art around it. So and it turned out to be two pieces of art, and then there was a corrupt Frenchman at the heart of it. Not corrupt exactly, but there was a chancer. There was an opportunistic Frenchman at the heart of it, Felix Agnes, who had come over to the United States as a soldier of fortune and made a fortune. He became a newspaper man, and so he was like this big flamboyant newspaper character who'd been in the wars. So he was kind of like a Colonel Sanders of letters, and he bought himself a grave plot in Druid Ridge and commissioned a statue and had this great statue put there. And not long after, this was while he was still alive.
Yes. Okay.
So a lot of Victorians did that, actually, which I think is great.
They put their monuments up before they died.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So they could really appreciate the money they spent on them.
Of course.
So they go back there, and Agnes was very fond of this until the widow of the very famous sculptor, Augustus St. Gaudens, came up from D.C. and said that's an unauthorized copy of one of my husband's statues, and he should be ashamed of himself. And so he had to backpedal very rapidly because, in fact, he had bought an unauthorized copy of a statue that was known as Grief. That was in D.C. and was a tourist destination in D.C. It had been purchased and commissioned for the death of Clover Adams. Henry Adams's wife, who died young and under, if not suspicious circumstances, it was she died young, and she was very mourned because she was a Washington D.C. socialite. She was a party gal, and so everyone really enjoyed her company. She died early, and this statue was commissioned, and then all of a sudden, a not particularly good copy of it appears up in Baltimore by this newspaper guy, and he said, well, I'm going to sue the guy that sold it to me because he said it was an original. So he said he didn't take away the statue. He didn't do the decent thing because it was a good statue. So he wound up leaving it there. And over the years, in the 1920s in particular, this is when all the Black Aggie stories started to happen.
Started in the 20s.
And, they were... It was not like, it was only about 10 years after he died. People would be going there and sitting on Aggie's lap, and the eyes would glow. Some stories said they would glow red. Some stories said they'd glow green. Sometimes she would hug you and squeeze you to death. Sometimes your heart would just stop. If you were a girl, then you would fall pregnant, or if you were a pregnant girl, you'd have a miscarriage. So all these legends were surrounded this one statue, and as a journalist, of course, my goal is always to try and condense the stories into one narrative. And when the stories are that diverse, there's no one narrative.
Right.
And so I thought, well, let me see if I can get some definitive stories. So I over-researched this thing like crazy because it's possible to do that with these tales. I went down to College Park, and there's a folklore archive there. And in the 1960s, a freshman English class would do oral histories. And there must have been 20 or 30 different Aggie stories. So I went down there, and there was a crate of one of those boxes, archive boxes, and they pulled this out at the Folklore archive down there, and I wasn't allowed to take photographs, but I was allowed to have a laptop. So I was just tap 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 tap. I transcribed probably about 18 of these stories. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? Yeah, I'm going to try and condense a single story out of it. And in the end, I thought, there is no single story, and that's not the point. It's not how folklore works. That's how journalistic stories work. And if I try to impose a structure on top of it, it'll lose everything. So I wound up running 2 or 3 of those stories that I got from the archive in College Park and said, okay, there's a lot of contradictory narratives, but it's scary. Oh, and it's disappeared. Because in the 1960s, so many people were going there, causing so much disruption, that the family and the cemetery decided it's got to go. So the next thing the thrill seekers that went there by night found was the plinth there with Agnes written on it, and just a scar where the statue had been. And is that the end of the story? Of course it's not the end of the story, because if you're going down to get scared at night, and you know there's a statue there and the statue's not there, well, it's obviously come to life and it's stalking. And so, once again, I'm not just making that up. This was part of the narrative that was in this oral history. So it's all part of the legend. And sure enough, they were, sort of tales of Aggie stalking.
Oh, wow.
Stalking the cemetery, and that's where she went. There was also talk that didn't quite gel with the statue, because I got very familiar with the statue.
You've never seen it, though.
Well, not strictly true, because it did resurface. I'll circle around to that. I'll circle around to that. Okay. I saw the original down in I think it's Rock Creek Cemetery in D.C. And it's she's leaning over and she's shrouded and she's got a hand up to her cheek and you can't see her eyes really unless you duck under. Very sort of mournful, very striking, imposing statue.
That's the original now.
That's the original.
And you saw the original.
I saw the original one that was made by Augustus St. Gordon's
for
Clover Adams, and then I saw the scar in Druid Ridge where the statue had been removed and donated to the Smithsonian, and they said lost because it disappeared for a good 20 or 30 years. No one saw it. So obviously she was stalking. She was stalking the cemetery. Then there were some tales of how Aggie's arm was outstretched, and there was a newspaper article about how the arm had actually been taken off, and somebody was caught putting it in the trunk of their car.
Oh, okay.
So they'd hacked off a souvenir, and was arrested. And he was saying, "Well, yeah, she was threatening to kill this woman, so I saved her. I cut the arm off because she'd come to life." I think that was thrown out of court as a defence, and he was charged with vandalising a graveyard. But all the while I'm thinking, well, there's no outstretched arm unless you go like a block and a half down in the cemetery, and there is another statue of a woman with a shroud over, with her arm outstretched. And if you look, it looks like it's been fixed. The vertebrae is a little different part of the way through the arm. So there's one Aggie statue that's not Aggie, but everyone said it was. Okay. And there was where she's picked up a chair and she's gone a couple of blocks down where, I don't know, where the view's better. I don't know. She moved. And if you're not careful, she'll follow you, and then you're doomed. Because when Aggie gets you, there's no going back.
Okay, is that the same as the Rabbit Man?
Oh, the Bunny Man.
The Bunny Man.
The Bunny Man. Oh, that was another great one. Also down in the Folklore archive, down in.
Was it? Well, yeah. With the Aggie thing, I know.
Yeah.
I have seen the statue. I don't know if it's the Clover Adams statue or they found the actual other one, because I spent many years living in D.C. and one of the places I would haunt was the National Portrait Gallery, National Gallery of Art.
Right.
And they had the statue there, one of the two. And it's like
really
gray or dark gray granite, and the whole thing, with the shrouded. And for a while, it was like neglected, like it was kept down, like in a stairwell between the buildings.
It was an unauthorized copy, and there were some real issues with it being an unauthorized copy.
The copy, because I guess Clifford Adams is still in Congressional Cemetery or wherever it is.
Right. Yeah.
But this one, and I saw it, and I said, wow, and I forget what they did with it. If they ever put it on display or that. It's in one of those government warehouses somewhere.
It's like the end of that, the movie with...
Raiders of the Lost
Ark. Raiders of the Lost Ark, exactly.
Now, do you want to say anything about the Bunny Man?
I will say something about the Bunny Man, but shall I leave people waiting to find out where the Black Aggie really is now, or shall I...
Why don't you tell us?
Okay, right.
Please tell us now.
It's in the courtyard of the Dolly Madison house, so it's right around the corner.
Oh, that must be the one that
right around the corner from the White House. Yeah, yeah.
They moved it out there. I thought it was.
They did, yeah. I think that it was one of those things they didn't want to put it on display because it was an unauthorized copy.
Oh, did you see
But
it?
they wound up. Oh yeah, I've seen it.
The Octagon House is what that is called.
Is that what it's called?
Yes, because it's.
Is that because of the number of sides, by any chance?
Yes.
Oh, how about that?
It has 8 sides.
Well, there. Yeah, it would.
You know.
Yeah, that's right.
And
Well,
you're the math. You're the IT guy. Come on.
Yeah, I was trying to do my figuring in hexadecimal there. I was going to get around to 8 in the end.
Okay, well, it's a great ending. Anyway,
So
it's in the Dolly Madison house. I've never been to the Octagon House, but I've gone by it.
It's there. There's a people, sort of government workers hang out and have lunch around there. So it's definitely visible.
I may be wrong. Let me back it up. I'm going to play that one back, but we'll keep running.
Okay.
Is that there is, because I lived in Silver Spring for a long time, that there's Octagon House, which was the little White House after the British burnt the White House in 1812 or whatever, 1814. It's okay.
I'll take responsibility for that. That was my people. Yeah.
No, but there's also a house that Dolly Madison lived in when she was a widow. That's on Lafayette Square.
I think
across
that's
from the right White House.
Yes, it's right in the thick of things.
So is it in Lafayette Square, maybe in the back or something?
Yeah, there's a little courtyard around there.
Oh, in the courtyard.
And there's I don't know which department it is, but there's a government department.
I'm sure they're all
right there, and they come out there with their little box lunches and
and they just
and they hang out next to Aggie.
Wow, I didn't know this, but I used to hang out at the Westminster Churchyard. So.
Well, you clearly had the right idea because that's a phenomenal place. Love Poe.
I was there before all the renovations, and it looks nice now. It was the rundown old creepy graveyard in the 70s,
Oh, which are the creepy rundown ones are the best.
They are the best.
I would like to think that it was probably late night movies from the Hammer horror canon that really got me interested, and many of them were done in a very, very rundown cemetery in North London, Highgate Cemetery.
Actually, really was done there.
Oh yeah, there was, but it was the most. It was out in the country when they first built it, like a lot of these Victorian garden cemeteries, and it was beautiful. There were huge amounts of money put into these Italianate marble sculptures and these. A lot of cemeteries really like to have pyramids and Egyptian-style things, partly because the Egyptians revered the dead in a way that the Victorians found romantic, and partly because there's Rosicrucian and a lot of secret societies like the Rosicrucians, certainly the Masons, the Oddfellows. They all really enjoyed. Egyptian symbolism.
It's in their rituals.
Exactly. So they wound up. You see a lot of stuff in graveyards with that kind of symbolism in it. The 3 linked squares for the Oddfellows. 3 linked chain links.
Yes. Now, I was going to ask you, because I know we could do this all night. Is that
there is a danger? You've wound me up, man. You give me a forum. I'm going to keep going.
All right, you got kicked alive there. That no longer zombified. But anyway, did you have the interest in folklore, strange, true historical crime, and urban legends before you worked on this book series?
I did. There was in the 1970s when I was a teenager. There was a great deal of renewed interest in Jack the Ripper, for example.
Oh, of course.
And that was the era when. there was a lot of speculation about aliens. There was a lot of speculation about cryptids. It was all, it was really fermenting in the 70s.
I remember Chariots of the Gods. Stuff like that.
Erich von Däniken, the Swiss, I think he was a doorman in a hotel, but somehow he managed to get this international bestseller. And I'm thinking, a lot of these arguments are really tenuous, but he made a fortune at it. Maybe I could do that sometime. Yeah. I've spun out a lot of books. I've not made the money Erich von Däniken made. He made a lot of money out of that.
So we'll get to that too. I mean, you have to just hit some notes tonight because we can always have you back. Mm-hmm. Is when did you figure you wanted to be, or you said, I think I can be an author, or what made you want to write or be an author?
Wow. Well, I'll tell you, it was part of the immigrant experience. Really? I came to the country, and like a lot of people who move, cherchez la femme. I got married and wanted to settle down and start a family, but I was in a different country. And it's like, what can I do? And I'd loved reading, and I'd loved writing, but I'd earned money where I could, and so I wound up getting a job in a magazine. It was a computer magazine, and for the next 8 years, I don't know whether you've dealt with a lot of people from IT.
Not really, not in the studio.
They are not great writers as a group. Okay. Technically, they're analytical. They can pull together, but when they're writing about technology and so forth, they're not great writers. So a lot of the stuff, my job was to take stuff that technicians and IT people had written about the subject they knew, which was, networking protocols and the latest, the latest update to such and such a server. And for a magazine audience, for a popular magazine audience, try and translate it into English. So, I was reading a lot of dry technical material and attempting to make it interesting for 8 years. And you asked me when I thought I could be a writer, and some of these people were writing books, and I knew what their prose was when it came in. I'm thinking, oh boy, they must have some really great editors. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, okay, I'm raising a couple of children. They're very well fed. They're happy in this kind of business. And yet these guys are getting their names on the covers of books, and they really can't write. So I thought, I could do better than that. And so I tried. That was the point at which I thought, I could be a writer. Yeah,
you did.
But at that point, I was literally I was attempting to. It's almost like it was almost like a factory job. There was text coming in. I did quality control on it and then passed it forward. So so it was that. It was assembly line writing. But I'll tell you one thing about that is that you don't get writer's block when you're doing assembly line work. It's a luxury you can't afford. You get stuff out, you get it clear, and if it gets a little formulaic from time to time, at least you get it done. And one of the biggest problems I know amongst people that I've been dealing with since is that people have wonderful, wonderful stories, and they just don't get them out. They tell them, and I listen to them, and sometimes I will recount other people's stories. In the past 3 years, I've started my own little book project, which is a periodical type project. They're called Dead of Summer and Dead of Winter. I'm working on Dead of Summer at the moment. And initially it was a friend of mine and I were doing book talks together, because it's easier when there's two of you, because when one of you wants to get a drink, the other one can take over. When you can tell the audience is getting bored, the other one will do a story while you regroup. And so we used to do these things together. And libraries, which is where we did a lot of talks, would say, what's the topic of your talk? And we'd say, Dead of Summer. Okay. And it's like, well, what's it about? So we don't know. It's something to do with the dead, and we're doing it in the summer. So something. So it was literally a cover. It was a bit of a joke. It was a joke name: Dead of Winter, Dead of Summer, whatever it was. That would be what we were talking about, and it was a good go-to title. And as we started, sort of going to various events and meeting people with great stories, it's like, can you write that story down? And they would go, well,
Yeah.
try. And the stories would come in, and once again, sometimes they needed a lot of editing, but there are great stories out there. So I've been collecting them and putting them into these compilations for the past couple of years now.
So they are, as you say, probably anthologies in a way.
Yeah, they really are, yeah. In some cases, they are people that that I worked with on the Weird Maryland. Brian Goodman, for example, was a newspaper man who I did a lot of work with on in Weird Maryland, and I've been in touch with him ever since. Well, he's written for every single copy of the Dead of series.
Okay.
And then there was a paranormal writer from Pennsylvania called Laurie Hull. She's done the same. I gather you had Eric Christopher Myers, the director, in at one point.
Oh, he was here.
He wrote a
As was Meg Morgan.
Oh, I'm dying to read her book. I really am.
Talk about a woman sort of like you. I was going to bring her up as an example. Is that she's a technical writer.
Exactly right.
And she's now writing a science fiction novel, which she hopes is the first of a series.
Yes, she's cranking it out. I've met. She's not yet shown me her work.
Oh, she has.
I've offered to edit. I've offered to edit it for
or
her and all kinds of stuff. And she was playing it close to her vest, and I think she's probably going to do. From what I've seen of the way her mind works, fascinating. I've not yet got her to write for me. Eric Christopher Myers did write an article for one of the Dead of series. I'm trying to get him
to do
another. But yeah, he's promoting this amazing film that he put together.
That's right, Butterfly
So
Kisses, which everybody should see.
Well, I'm slightly biased about this.
Because you're in it.
Only because I was fascinated by. Eric called me up, and it was
Did he ask you to be in it?
It was on the strength of Weird Maryland, which he had read, and he said, "I'm doing this thing," and so we danced around on this phone conversation. I still don't know quite how he got my number, but we danced around the topic, and I thought, this seems like an interesting story. Then we met and talked at greater length. I'm thinking, this sounds like a very interesting story. And the fact that there is a character in it called Matt Lake who wrote a book called Weird Maryland, which meant that I didn't need to be an actor. And this was the key.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't act. Don't make me act. He said, you don't have to act. You just have to be yourself.
You did act.
Hey?
You did act.
Well,
the first scene where it's in black and white and you're just talking about the Blink Man.
Yeah.
That's okay. I mean, that's right in your wheelhouse.
That's all in my wheelhouse, yeah.
Yeah, but then the part where you really get pissed at Gavin, that's acting.
It's actually, that was how long were we? That was probably about 2 or 3 hours that we were together. And this filmmaker Gavin that came forward that Eric introduced me to comes in and we start talking, and he's very focused on his topic, and there is a scene in this film in which I look annoyed. That wasn't acting.
Oh, it wasn't.
It wasn't. No. The character that came in and was talking to me, I don't think all of this came in to the movie in the edit. So I think that reaction that you saw was not. What set it up was not actually what you heard. So it was very well edited in that respect.
I gotcha.
But he was dropping some comments about what he thought about bits of my book. And, you don't mess with someone and their work, So there was a little flinch there that it's like, okay.
All right.
Yeah, it's like, take the camera off, because this is, I'm getting a little, I'm not enjoying this so much anymore. Have you got everything you need? Because this has to stop now. So I didn't entirely have to act at all.
Okay, I got you.
No, because he was genuinely irritating. And it's really interesting. I have seen this film with a number of people now who had no real grounding. They weren't prepared for it. I said it was a found footage horror film.
Yes.
I was in it as myself. And they were going, oh yeah, we'll come along and see it. And half the people really hated the character of the filmmaker.
Yes.
The fella who ticked me off.
Dan hates the filmmaker.
Really?
Character.
Okay. You're not wrong. He genuinely irritated me during that scene.
The actor did.
The actor did. Well, yeah.
Not the character, or maybe both.
It was, I'm not used to the levels. I interact with people as I see them. It's why I'm having so much fun now.
Okay.
This fella was putting off a vibe that was very irritating.
Okay.
But anyway, half the people, sort of were irritated, and a lot of people felt really sad for him and really sorry for him because they felt what he was going through to make him so objectionable. From my moment, however, my few moments of meeting this fella, it's like, I don't like that character at all. You ticked me off in front of a camera, and I didn't like that at all. And so, my reaction was not to like him.
All right. And maybe what Eric was going for.
It wouldn't, but that man's process is interesting. The way in which Eric Christopher Meyer's brain works is quite fascinating.
Well, it's interesting you adding that little bit, because we've already talked to him on our last live stream. We had to interview with him, so people are familiar with what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And that it adds to the veracity in a sense of, is it a documentary or is it not? Because you're saying your reactions were genuine. You weren't like saying lines that were scripted for you over and over, like take 20 kind of a thing. Show your anger again, Matt. Can you get it up one more time? It wasn't like that.
No, it wasn't. I mean, I've been bitten a little bit by the acting bug, so I've been on stage a couple of times since then. But at that time, I hadn't done any acting at all, and it was. Eric set up the situations that just worked, or not. I mean, I'm not one to judge it. People, the movie is winning awards, so clearly he did something right. I was along partly because the story interested me, partly because I was needed for the story, but also I'd never seen the film being made, so I said, can I come along and watch you film other bits of it? And he's going, yeah, sure. So I saw him filming some on the street stuff. I spent a day down in Ellicott City, just lurking in the background, seeing that being done. And the process was very, very interesting. And considering the budget the budget for filming it can't have been big. No. The budget for post-production was a little more so. I mean, but the process of getting that together was very interesting. Very, I mean, I throw around terms like professional and this kind of stuff, not in the sense that he was being paid a lot of money for it, but in the sense that he knew what he was doing, he did it, and he did it well and efficiently. And he wasn't always everyone's friend doing it, but he got it done. So that being around people who know what they're doing is really interesting. So that was what dragged me in there.
Oh, that's the story there. So we've got the whole story. It's your personal story about it being in a film. Now, before we quit, because we're going to run out of time here, is when I was looking at the number of books that you have either written, co-written, or edited, it's how many? Do you know how many books you've published? I don't know exactly. I saw a figure bantied about 17, but it might be more than that.
I think it is more than that. My first book I wrote in 6 weeks in 1993.
And what was the?
It was called Breaking into Windows. It was about Microsoft Windows.
Interesting.
I was attempting to be subversive and write a quirky book about technology. Right. And as I said, I was feeding a family and paying off a mortgage and doing all these grown-up things. So I would write more or less anything that was asked of me. A lot of it was magazine work. I've written for Family Circle. I wrote one article for Playboy that I know no one read.
People were too busy looking at the pictures.
I don't think I've read. I forget what it was about. All I know is that somewhere along the line,
paid you.
I had a check that was rubber stamped with
a little bunny
with Hef's daughter. Hef's daughter was.
That's when she was in control.
That was when she was in control. Her signature was rubber stamped on this check.
Oh, cool.
Oh, I didn't frame it or anything. No, I cashed the thing.
Christine or Christy Hefner.
It was Christy Hefner. Yeah.
Well, let me get into this because we don't have time. I just give the depth of the things that you've done. Interesting. It's a variety of things. 50 Ways to Off an Elf. Is the title of one.
Yes, that's a picture book about ways of destroying the elf on the shelf.
A little help from the Imps?
Is a translation of an 1843 German poem for children. It's like Dr. Seuss.
Okay.
And it charmed me.
Okay.
Charmed me to no end when I read this thing. And I couldn't read it to my children because they didn't speak German. I had a bit of high school German, so I kind of translated that and
Yeah, so you
had
do
it in an illustrated
some
form.
poetry, because here's what it says: a volume of poetry is "Here Be Monsters."
Here Be Monsters, yes. There was, that was, the story behind that was that the Dogfish Head Brewery, I think one of the founders of the Dogfish Head Brewery was an English major.
Okay.
And he, every year, puts up a competition where you submit a book-length volume of poetry, and if you win, this was the key, they'll give you $200, 2 cases of beer, and they'll publish your book.
Wow.
Now, the $200 and the 2 cases of beer was obviously my motivation. And they did not pick up my book. They did not win. So I thought, well, I'll put it out anyway. So I did.
And of course, there was the Night of the Krampus.
The Night of the Krampus.
And the Krampus's carols.
Krampus carols.
Did you write the carols yourself, or were they found from other sources? Or?
Well, "Oh Run All Ye Fearful" is, it sounds kind of familiar. They're parodies of Christmas carols.
Oh, they're parodies.
They're parodies of Christmas carols. And yes, I wrote them. And I got a musicologist and music teacher to put them on staves, because I can't do that. And that all started out a long, long time ago. That has its roots in Hamden in Baltimore.
Oh, really?
There is a wonderful store there called Bazaar, which opened, and I went there and I gushed because I loved the stuff they had. So I was fanboying over them, and I said, "You should have your photograph taken with the Krampus at Christmas time." This was in July it opened, and they said, and they nodded and smiled, and they were slightly. I'm a tall guy, so I was looming a bit, and I was very enthusiastic. But I gave them a copy of Weird Maryland as a good luck, I think they sold it because they had to pay rent. But that's fine. But the 2 guys were great. They, come November rolls around, and they said, "We're thinking of having photographs taken with Krampus. Do you want to be the Krampus?"
Oh.
And I said, "Well, tell me about it." He said, "Well, you come up and you dress up as Krampus, and people take photographs, and we'll have a party." And I was thinking, and it'll be about 3 hours. And I was figuring, 3 hours is that's going to drag unless we do something. So I wrote a few parody carols. And we all went out and sang them on the street in Hamden, and just down the road from the Miracle on 34th Street. We thought that was a subversive thing to do. Well, people liked it so well that they started doing a Krampus laugh, a Krampus run, in Hamden just before Christmas, around St. Nicholas's Day.
Okay.
And so I wound up going on the first of them. And I saw some of the Krampus costumes, and I thought, they're too good. I can't do this. So I dressed up as a traditional St. Nicholas, which is a bishop's thing, and I lead everybody in song. And they had one Krampus laugh. They've had 4 of them now. They're every Christmas now.
Oh, they do it now.
Every Christmas.
They'll do it again this year.
They'll do it again this year. Very close to St. Nicholas's Day.
Okay,
so the first, somewhere around the first or second Saturday in December.
Right.
Starting at the pub Decliner Dival and going up to the Miracle on 34th Street, so all the festive lights. There'd be a whole bunch of people dressed as Krampuses.
Interesting.
And so I wound up writing a book
about
the Krampus that was a parody of The Elf on the Shelf, because you'll have noticed from that one that you mentioned earlier, I'm not a fan of The Elf on the Shelf.
Yes.
I think he's creepy, and I think the Krampus is kind of warm and cuddly by comparison. So... the Carols book came out, the Krampus book came out. I love the Krampus.
Oh.
I love it. It's like, again, this is folk tradition.
It is.
That had kind of, it had faded away. Hadn't really made the transition from Bavaria.
Right.
Only about 10 years ago, it started to make that transition, and more cities are having Krampus events now. And Krampus is becoming part of Christmas again, which I like, actually, because I like the idea of the light and dark. These are themes that go throughout folklore. There's villains, there's heroes, there's happy endings, there's sad endings. There's light and dark in all the literature, really, but in folk stories especially. So if you're going to have a benevolent, Christkindled, bestowing gifts upon the masses, all the good little boys and girls. The idea of the bad little boys and girls just not getting gifts, that's not enough. They got to get punished. It's fair and just that the evildoers get punished, and that's why the Krampus is a good thing, because he makes sure that those who do wrong get their just desserts. So I do a lot of Krampus themed stuff, and I love it.
That's good. I was going to say the only way I didn't know about it until a few years ago. One of my favorite shows. It was just off TV. It was called Grimm, and they did an episode on the Krampus.
Yes. I liked that episode. I got to admit, I was a big fan of Grimm.
Yeah.
Big fan of Grimm.
And the only, before we stop, the one book, was this one of your math books that was Where the Fulcrum Lies? That's your book, isn't it?
Maybe there's some other,
January of 2017, it says Where the Fulcrum Lies by Matt Lake.
That might be another Matt Lake.
I know that
there's a bassist called Matt Lake. Well,
there's a Reverend
if you count the Universal Life Church, I'm a Reverend Doctor actually.
Okay. Oh, excuse me.
And if you count the island nation of Sealand, which is a defence platform in the Thames estuary, I'm also a Baron.
Oh, excuse me.
There's one. Do we have any time for this story?
I don't think so.
Okay, we'll come back to this.
We will.
You're going to have me back, man.
We have to have you back.
All right.
And before we go, look into that camera over there and tell people your contact information.
Well, I am Matt Lake, and if you track me down on Facebook, it's probably the best way to find me. I'm That Matt Lake. So it's facebook.com/thatmattlake, and that's me.
Okay. Very good. And Matt, it was a delight having you. I look forward to this for weeks, and 'cause I knew you'd be great. So
well, let's do it again sometime.
We will, believe me.
Because I haven't told you those. I haven't told you
lots of other stories.
I haven't told you many stories.
And that's something we'll talk about off camera.
Excellent.
And so, folks, here we go. That was a delightful 30, 40 minutes with Matt. It could have gone much longer. I am sure you will see him again here. And so until next time, I'm Paul Stefan, and good night.
You're watching Books and Authors on TV Free Baltimore.